Hey everyone, I think we're just going to wait like 2 or 3 minutes for people to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Where are folks coming from? Hey Shane.
Hey.
We are just going to wait like 2 minutes or so for another minute or two for folks to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Cool. Yeah, I've clicked on the wrong link, so it took
You hate to see it.
Yeah, a minute to get in here, but we're good to go now.
Pittsburgh. Okay. Anonymous attendee. I feel like I will say there's one employee who works at Gatsby who I feel like would make themselves an anonymous attendee, and they live in Pittsburgh. Let me see if I can figure out what's up with the chat. I'm hearing that it's not working for folks, so give me a sec. All right, there we go. Chat is enabled. So if you're seeing it, there we go. Awesome. We have some people who say they like Pittsburgh. Oh, Columbia. Okay, Pittsburgh. Well, I am usually in California, but I am actually in like Texas on the Mexico border today, so a little different for me. Shane, where are you?
I am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
It is snowing here, so maybe not a good day to be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but other than that.
Oh, Costa Rica. There, that's the winner. We got 2 of them.
I would like to be there right now.
Awesome. Well, we are 3 minutes past. We got a lot of content we want to get through. So we'll just go ahead and get started, I guess, sort of to introduce ourselves, which we probably should have done before, and that's my fault. My fellow Bay Area person, hello. I'm Maddie. I'm the VP of Ops over at Gatsby. So I just sort of do what I call et cetera stuff. Whatever they need, that's usually what I do. And Shane here can introduce himself as well.
Yep, my name is Shane Thomas. I'm a senior product manager at Gatsby. I've been at Gatsby for almost 3 years now, and I started as an engineer. I was an engineering manager, but when I started, I was focused on working with Gatsby and Drupal, and so that's why this topic is really of interest to me, because it's talking about, Gatsby, Valhalla, the next generation of Gatsby, as well as like really integrating back in with Drupal. And so I'm excited to chat with you a little bit more, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. Anything else before I kick it off, Maddie?
No. What should we expect? What's the flow of this? What's happening?
Yeah, so I'm going to go through some slides. I'll talk, it's pretty similar to webinars we've done in the past around Valhalla. So some of it might be review if you've been to one of those, but it's going to be a little more focused on how Valhalla can really help you decouple a Drupal website, and how it can maybe fit into, when you think about a web project and you're doing a headless or decoupled project, how Valhalla might be able to fit into your stack, so to speak. And then we'll do a demo, and we'll have hopefully a lot of time to answer questions. I'll reminisce a little bit, talk a little bit about an old project I worked on that was Drupal related. So it'll be fun. I'll go ahead and get started.
And if folks have questions, go ahead and please put them in the Q&A and not the chat. And that way I can make sure that we actually answer them. Sometimes the chat stuff gets buried, and I want to make sure we answer all your questions. I'll take some throughout, and we'll also have time at the end for questions. So if I don't get to it right away, we will get to it. Just put it in the Q&A. Awesome. And Shane, do you want to share full screen right now? I see all your tabs.
You see all my tabs? That's okay.
Okay.
But I will. There you go. Better?
Okay.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things that, really when thinking about why we built Valhalla, well, modern websites are pretty complicated. And a lot of times you're not just pulling content from a single CMS. Sometimes it's content that you're piecing together from a lot of different places. You might have an inventory system and a content management system, and some kind of data that you got to get from this third-party API that you just need for this one small piece of your website. But really, you want to be able to piece all that content together and build a compelling and dynamic user experience, right? A dynamic website. And that's really the goal. When you build a website, you want people to be able to use it. You want to be able to accomplish whatever the goal is of the website, whether it's drawing interest to something, converting, selling products. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we got here. So before we talk too much about what Valhalla unlocks, I think it's first helpful to take a step back and talk about why Valhalla exists in the first place. Why do we actually build it? Well, we've been building Gatsby for over the last 5 years now. And one of the best things about Gatsby that we've really learned and kind of really honed in on over the last 5 years is that there's an ecosystem of source plugins. And I've spent a lot of time in the Drupal ecosystem as well. And so I really look at source plugins. They're kind of like Gatsby's version of Drupal modules, right? One of the best parts about Drupal is its module ecosystem. One of the best parts about Gatsby is our source plugin ecosystem, which really lets you connect to any CMS and then use that content within building out a website. And really our source plugin architecture's matured a lot over the last 5 years. It's relatively stable. There's not a lot of things changing. We're still making improvements, of course, making things faster, but it really has matured, especially over the last Gatsby version 3, 4, and now into Gatsby 5. But without source plugins, life's a little sad. So if you are familiar with maybe using other front-end frameworks, Next.js, Remix, and you've had to connect to a CMS, you learn that this is a contentful example here, but you have to write a lot of code and you have to learn, read a bunch of API docs on Contentful, or in the case of Drupal, you're learning about Drupal's JSON API and how it works. And you really have to become an expert in the API in order to learn how to pull content from that API and then, actually get that content in your website. But with Gatsby, the nice thing is you just add a source plugin, you add a little bit of configuration you can see here. When you're connecting to Drupal, it's really, you point it at your Drupal's JSON API. If you have certain content that you want, to be hidden behind authentication, you maybe pass in your username and password or an authentication token, and then that's it. Gatsby will be able to pull in that content, and then you can use it in your site. And Gatsby, the way it works is it pulls everything into like kind of like a database, and it makes a GraphQL API. So you're able to just use GraphQL and pull in data from any CMS, and then just use that and build out pages on your site. So it doesn't matter if part of your site is built with, let's say, Drupal, and you're using Drupal for the landing pages, but maybe the marketing team wants to use WordPress. And so you have to use WordPress for the blog posts. And now with Gatsby, it allows that to happen. You just add in both those source plugins, you pull it in, and you're using the same GraphQL queries, and you don't need to know anything about WordPress's API. You don't need to be an expert in Drupal's API. You just connect it and it works. So when we think about as it exists today, like how Gatsby works today, we have Gatsby, the framework, which is open source. You can build sites with the best React framework in my opinion, and we have Gatsby Cloud, which is where the best place to deploy, host, even preview those changes. And when you think about what happens during a build, Gatsby is really focused on static first because we think static is the fastest. And so we try to, everything kind of goes down to static, but then of course you can be dynamic if you need to, but it starts with static. But the process typically goes, you have your different CMSs. In this case, you can see the Drupal logo there, but you connect all your different CMS options or wherever you're going to get data from. And then you pull it into this GraphQL data layer, and then you get to use React and GraphQL to build out your front end. And then from there, you can generate pages. Again, like everything is static by default. However, there might be the need for on demand, which is DSG, deferred static generation, which essentially means don't build it right away. Wait till someone goes to your website, requests the page, then build it and cache that result. And then server-side rendering. So if you have something that needs to be dynamic, you can do that too. And then after it does all this generation process, this building process, it deploys to Gatsby Cloud. So you have like two big steps. You have the sourcing, and then you have like the building process. And then of course, the last step is to deploy. But it's always been in our DNA at Gatsby to try to be fast. We always, we want you to be able to build a 1,000,000-page static website in seconds. But we've always asked ourselves how we can be even faster. And we talk a lot with customers. Part of my job as a product manager is to chat with people that are using Gatsby, and a lot of times it's because of my background, people that are using Drupal. And so we hear things, like build times vary depending on our CMS APIs. With Drupal, this is sometimes really dependent on, is your JSON API cached or not? Did something happen that broke the cache? There are times when it can be really fast, and sometimes it can be really slow. And then as another example, this is more of a WordPress quote, but sometimes builds timeout are really slow, and sometimes WordPress's API can be really slow as well. And it often causes this perception with someone who's using your site and building and publishing pages in this like headless or decoupled environment to seem like things are broken or not working very well. And a lot of times it's just like latency or the API is running a little slow. So what we learned pretty quickly talking to customers, especially when you think about this in terms of like a Gatsby site, is CMS APIs can quickly become a bottleneck. With Gatsby, you have local builds, which is, maybe developers that are building a new feature on their local environment. You have branch builds or your production builds of your actual site. You might have pull requests. Maybe a developer pushes up some code and wants to see those changes before you merge it. So you have that pulling in data, and then you have previews. So, your content editors are using it to preview the content, and it's all kind of going back to that bottleneck of that CMS API. So it's pretty, if you have a lot of people using your site at once, it can be pretty demanding on the API, and you need a lot of resources to make sure that your API can scale and handle that. So we started thinking, what if we didn't have to source content to build? What if we could just, not have to do that? Because that'd be pretty sweet. We could, just not have to go out to the API at all. And of course, we do have to go out to the API, but what if we could cache it? So we didn't have to go out to the API as frequently. And that's really what we came to with how we got to Valhalla, is we want to keep this GraphQL data layer, but we want it to persist. We want it to be a cache. And so we created Valhalla, and we use it on our GatsbyJS.com site, which sources content from Contentful and from WordPress. And you can see the median sourcing time. This is the time when we say we want to completely rebuild the site from scratch. How long is it going to take? You can see the median time goes down. But what's even more impactful is this P99, this 1% of times where either Contentful's API is a little slow, WordPress's API is a little slow. You can kind of get this, in this case, a lot of times it times out altogether, but it stays the same, right? Because it has this cached kind of middle layer content hub that's sitting between our APIs and our builds. And then we have a 32,000 page Drupal site that we do a lot of testing with, and it's the same kind of thing. I'm not going to say where the site's hosted, but the API sometimes works really fast, and you can see like the median is not too bad. But the P99, there's, 1 out of every 5 or 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20 builds that just goes a little slow for whatever reason. And it just takes a long time to source all that content from Drupal. Sometimes it's because of caching. Sometimes it's because maybe the services and the web servers are just running a little slower at certain times of the day. So now that we had this cache data layer, and we were really thinking about, okay, for Gatsby sites, this helps a lot. It speeds up builds. What if we could do other things with this? And so we started hearing things from customers like, it'd be great if I could access my Gatsby data with SSR. I have a bunch of real estate sites and I want to do some live filtering, and that doesn't really work well with static. And so we'd hear a lot of these things they want to build their sites to be even more dynamic, to be able to go out and get content from the CMS in real time, right? At runtime in the browser. And this is possible, certainly. But what you find is a lot of times then you're building a site where you're using GraphQL to generate your pages, but then you're reaching out to the CMS API, and you still have to learn how to use the CMS API in order to refresh that data or maybe filter through data. And so you end up having something like this. You have this kind of middle cache data layer, but for, functions or SSR or, real-time requests, you're still going out to the CMS to pull in data. So it'd be really nice if we didn't have to do that. So we decided to turn this cache data layer into a real-time GraphQL API. So this way, everything you do during your Gatsby build, you could now do in real time, right from the browser in SSR. You can access it through a Gatsby function, and you're just making the same types of GraphQL queries that you would make when you're building out the rest of your site, which makes it really convenient for not having to read API docs, which I don't really like to do. I'll do it if I have to, but I prefer not to have to read a bunch of API docs just to build a website. But this started to unlock even more use cases as we started testing this, and we were kind of running through this idea with the team. We started hearing things and having conversations like, it'd be great to use Gatsby's data layer in Expo apps, or we have a React Native app that shares a lot of the same content as our website. Or sometimes we'd be talking to customers that says, that would say something like, we have a Next.js project, the team knows Next.js, so they've already committed that we want to use Next, which is great. But we basically need to build a GraphQL data layer because we have Drupal and we need to connect it to a bunch of systems. And it would be nice to not have to build that, right? We could maybe build something like Valhalla that could do that for you. And so what Valhalla is, if you haven't done much research, hopefully this will be exciting to you. It's exciting to me. You pull in your content, from whatever CMS. You can use GraphQL queries, and then you can use it in any framework you want. It works great with Gatsby, of course. It's basically zero config. It just works. You just turn it on. But it can work with Next.js. It can work with, Astro or Svelte or Remix. And so it provides you kind of this content hub, this cached middle layer GraphQL API that you can connect your content and then use with your framework. So it's kind of like that connecting block between a bunch of different data APIs and how you want to present that data to customers or to your website visitors. So you can think of, you might connect Drupal, and then maybe there's another reason where you have some other third-party API that you need to pull in data from, some kind of legacy API, or maybe it's Drupal with Shopify. Maybe you don't want to use Drupal Commerce and the client really wants to use Shopify for e-commerce, but Drupal for all your other pages. This becomes possible. And then, of course, you can use whatever front-end framework you want to actually build out the front end of your site.
Quick question. I'm going to jump in just with a couple, but I think we're going to actually get a lot of these questions answered in the next 5 minutes. So one question that someone had earlier is like, do I need to know React to use Valhalla?
So that's a good question. No, not technically, because it really depends on what kind of front-end framework you want to use. Like if we go back to this slide, if you think about if you are decoupling a Drupal project, you're still choosing that you want to use Drupal for the stuff that Drupal does really well, the content editing, the content modeling. It's great for content editors to be able to use, but you're deciding that instead of using Drupal's, theme layer, you want to use some other more modern framework, which there's a lot of reasons you might choose to do that. Drupal's theme layer is not always the fastest. Like it can be made fast, but it's kind of hard to do, or it's, you have to be pretty conscious in how you're doing that. But a lot of the more modern frameworks are kind of fast by default, Gatsby specifically, but others as well. And so if you wanted to use Next or Gatsby, then yes, you would need to use React, but maybe you want to use some other framework that isn't a React framework, something that you're, that you're more comfortable with or that you already know. Maybe it's Angular or something.
Awesome. We'll keep going. I think we're going to get to a couple more questions in the next few slides. So I'll wait and then we'll bring those up.
All right. And so I wanted to highlight this one. So this is really, there's one of our agencies that we work with. They said, we have a customer with the Next.js project, want to integrate it with Drupal, but they want to build their own GraphQL data layer to make the API more consistent. And a lot of times what I found, I used to work at a Drupal agency, so I've worked on some really large scale Drupal projects, and you're always pulling in data from somewhere. And by default, I'm a developer, I'm an engineer. You want to just use what you know. And what I always knew was Drupal, right? I knew that Drupal is really good for, modeling content and building out, your content structures. And so what you do is you'd figure out ways to just make Drupal your content hub. You figure out, whether it's in like a cron job, you'd be pulling in data from an API and you'd put it into content types in Drupal. And then you could use that content, with Drupal's theme layer. But this becomes a little more difficult if you want to decouple Drupal and you want to get some of the benefits of some of these more modern front-end frameworks, but you still want to use Drupal for what it's best at. So as kind of a blast from the past, I actually, I built a module once to do this same kind of thing. I don't know if I'd call this a legacy API, but to me, GoToWebinar seems kind of legacy. I don't know. You all might still use it. But this was for us, a customer that had a pretty large scale Drupal site, and they used GoToWebinar. And what they wanted to do is they want to make sure that their webinars could show up on their Drupal site, right? They wanted to have upcoming webinars and they could see it. And so I did what any Drupal developer would do. I figured out, okay, well, I'll learn GoToWebinar's API. I will figure out a way to model this content into Drupal. And so you can see, you install it, you create a content type, and then you kind of map a bunch of fields and it syncs it. I think it has the ability to sync it over like a cron run, or the ability to sync it when webinars are updated on GoToWebinar side. Like GoToWebinar will trigger a hook and then it'll like pull in that information. And I was pretty proud of it. It was pretty cool. But I spent a really long time building this for this customer, right? Like they needed it, so it had to be done. And we were using Drupal, and it wasn't a decoupled project, and this was years ago. But you'll see, I would guess, like I don't want to admit how long this took me because it might make me seem like I don't know what I'm doing. But I spent we'll say I spent a few weeks like building this, and I was excited because I was like, oh, I want to contribute this back. It's a great opportunity. Others might want to use this that need to use GoToWebinar, and 5 sites are using it. So you can see it's not the most popular Drupal module. I probably spent a lot of time. Probably spent a lot of time I didn't need to make, really making it try to work well for others. But, it's great though. It is open source. You can use it. But it got me thinking, was all this work necessary? Did I need to spend, 2 or 3 weeks or however long it actually took to build this out, when all we wanted to do was take the webinars from GoToWebinar and display them on the website? Like that's it. They didn't need to necessarily edit the content once it was in Drupal. They didn't need to do all that. They just needed to get those webinars and display it. I don't remember if it was on a home page or an events page or something like that. And that's really what this solves, is that you don't have, if all you're doing is pulling data from API and displaying it on a website, you don't necessarily have to go through Drupal to do that. With Gatsby, it's a lot easier to just build a pretty simple source plugin rather than taking a couple weeks. It probably takes a couple days. And you don't have to go through the, as detailed of a process to get, to build out this fully functioning system that's probably not going to be used in most cases. So if I were to go back and I had Valhalla in this situation, I could write a pretty simple source plugin. Like I'd still have to write some code, but it'd be a Gatsby source plugin that would just get data from that API. It'd be a lot less code. It'd be a lot easier to maintain, because one of the things I finally looked through the issue queue of that Drupal module for the first time in a couple of years. And then of course it was asked when can it be made to support Drupal 9? Because apparently it doesn't work with Drupal 9. There must be some things I did that were Drupal 8 specific that use deprecated code, right? And it doesn't work in Drupal 9 now. The good thing about source plugins in Gatsby is, for the most part, since Gatsby version 3 to Gatsby version 5, there haven't really been any significant changes to our source plugin APIs. That means you could have upgraded from a Gatsby 3 to Gatsby 4 to Gatsby 5 without any major maintenance. Gatsby 2 to Gatsby 3, there were some changes, but even still, they were pretty minor in comparison to what you see a lot of times with Drupal major version upgrades. And it's really, the idea is it would be a lot faster. I could just focus on what matters most, just getting the content, and it's just JavaScript. So a lot of times it's, Drupal is kind of a pretty niche skill, learning the Symfony framework, learning how to build Drupal modules. it's kind of tough sometimes to find people that really have those kind of skills. But JavaScript's a lot more widely used. And in this case, a Gatsby source plugin is just JavaScript. So you can find someone with some JavaScript skills. They might not even have to be the most skilled backend developer to be able to build a source plugin. Now, there are some tricky points with source plugins, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot more straightforward than trying to build out a complete Drupal module.
Quick question, Shane. And I guess we'll see it in action, but there's a question from someone who just said, like, just going back to the basics here, why does there need to be a third party between my API and the front end? Like, Drupal is GraphQL ready. Like, why are we doing this?
That's a good question. So it doesn't have to be, right? You don't have to use something like Valhalla. You don't need a middle layer, or a middleware is sometimes, what I've heard it referred to. However, there are a lot of cases where it does make sense. So in my case, like, yes, I can, in order for me to just use Drupal's API, right, I would now have to, I would have two options. I either build this complex Drupal module to sync in data into Drupal and I model it, and then I use Drupal's API that way. That would work. That's a possibility. Another possibility is I just integrate directly with both of them on the front end. I just integrate with Drupal's API, and then I integrate with, this GoToWebinar API, and I just connect to both those from the front end. But a lot of times you need to like do stuff with data, and you might need to transform it. And so that's why having this middleware, we could say, pull in data from Drupal. I don't need to care about how Drupal's API works. I can pull in data from GoToWebinar. I could pull in data from other sources as well. Potentially some JSON feed or RSS feed somewhere, and I pull in data, and then now I can use that with the front end. So it allows you to kind of do some transformations on the data, and it also allows you to not have to, like I said, you don't have to necessarily build everything into a Drupal module and pull data if all you're trying to do is just display something on a website, which is most cases. So maybe seeing in action would also
that'd be really helpful.
Clarify that a little bit. So inside Gatsby Cloud, I have a site here, and this one happens, it's a Gatsby site. But, and if you're not familiar with this, some of this will, if you're not using Gatsby Cloud today, this might be, you might see some things you don't know, so feel free to ask questions. But we're enabling Content Hub, and we're turning on the GraphQL API, and this gives us this kind of tab here. In this test site, we're syncing content from Contentful, Shopify, and WordPress. So this isn't Drupal specific, but it works exactly the same way. We would just be pulling data from Drupal as well. And you can see there's a bunch of different events that say, we're getting data from Shopify. We're building the Valhalla Content Hub schema. We're deploying the data or syncing the data to the API. And this allows us to build a Gatsby site that uses this data. And so if you think about a traditional static site, it's sometimes hard to do some of these things. So if I go to the main page of this site, service unavailable. There we go. You can see that this one's pulling data from Contentful, this page, and it's SSG, which means this is a statically generated page. That means it's going to load really fast for a customer because it's all static. But I can also filter, and this is using SSR. And this is actually going out to Valhalla and getting this data live from the GraphQL API. And I'm able to, kind of filter by it. So if I search, I can search for this specific, animal. And you can see this is also using SSR. So this is actually like generated and built during build time to give you the static page. And then it goes out, and when you're searching or filtering, it's going out to this live GraphQL API and getting the data. And then there's a blog that's, statically generated. This is pulling data from WordPress during Gatsby's build time. It statically generates this, but we also built it so if I click on this, it's going out to the API and it's SSRing this page, or it's basically server-side rendering this page and returning it to me. Then we also have the same kind of thing with Shopify. It's a static site generator, but if I click on it, it's server-side rendered, or it's dynamically built by going out to Valhalla. So that's pretty cool. I have a Gatsby site, and I'm able to do things that weren't easy to do before on a static site. You can filter, you can search, you can add all these things by connecting it to Valhalla in this kind of real-time GraphQL API. But let's take a look at a couple other things. First of all, how does data get in here? Like what's the content editing experience like? How does that work? So I'm just going to search for a pet here. So I have Milo, and yeah, who doesn't think
Sorry, that was
Milo's,
really cute. Yeah.
Milo's a pretty he's a good boy, you know?
Mm.
And I'm going to, Milo is a good boy. I'm just going to add some text here, and I'm going to publish the changes. And this is contentful, but again, think of, Drupal's content, editor, it's Drupal content editing experience. It's the same thing, right? You might create a draft of it, but eventually you publish it. And this is going to kick off some things over here. So once it loads, you'll see that this is going to start syncing data. You can see this event's already done. And a few things would happen. It's going to kick off a build on the Gatsby side, which is already built. So anything that used that content statically in static, SSG pages is already ready. But then if we look, the dynamic pages, now, this is just finished. Now this should be ready. So if I go back to this page, I added some text here, I refresh, we should be able to see. It's taking a second to load.
While this is going, Shane, really quick, so do we rebuild for every data sync? And how is that working?
Yep. So the way that, and this is just Gatsby, there's nothing Valhalla specific about this. Is what it happens is when you trigger a update in Drupal, let's say, it's going to trigger a webhook that's going to tell Valhalla to sync that data. It's going to source from only what's changed from Drupal's API. And then it's going to trigger any builds of Gatsby sites. And it's also going to sync out to the GraphQL API. So this all.
So you're not doing a full build, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's why it only takes, seconds. So this, in 5 seconds, that data went from saved to available in any statically generated page that used that data. And then in 5 seconds plus probably, another looks like 4 to 5 seconds or so to sync it out to the API. So in 10 seconds, that data is now available in real time on this site. So whether it's on the homepage, statically generated, or if I were to have changed the title, for instance, his name would now be changed here when I get the data from the API.
Okay, and so you're in right now the Gatsby Cloud dashboard. 1% of a question that I just want to get to quickly, which is just do you have to have Gatsby Cloud to use Valhalla?
So Valhalla is a Gatsby product. You don't have to use a Gatsby site though to use Valhalla.
Okay.
So you would need a cloud account, but let's say you don't want to use Gatsby, that's fine. And that's actually, let's look at that next. So I said next, and I'm also going to show a Next.js site, but this is the exact same site powered by Next.js. And you can see, if you kind of compare, it's essentially, it's the same thing, right? It has the same blogs. I guess we don't have the WordPress images working, but it's the exact same site. And this is just all powered from the Valhalla Content Hub's GraphQL API. And then we did the same thing with Astro. So you can see that when you're choosing Valhalla, it doesn't mean you're tied to Gatsby. Yes, you do need a Gatsby Cloud account, but you don't have to have a Gatsby. You don't have to be building a Gatsby front end site in order to be using this. And then when we look at within Gatsby Cloud, you will see that there's this browse schema button, which just opens up your API, and then you can actually browse this data. And so you can see I have Shopify data here. WP stands for WordPress, all the WordPress data, and then I have this contentful data. So if I just run this, you can see that I'm getting all the contentful animals. I'm getting their name and then their about information. So we have Matt, Diego, June, Newton, Rudy, Burner, and you can see I could find Milo in there too, I'm sure. But you can see you just get a GraphQL API. So anything that you could use a GraphQL API for, you could use and pull data from. So essentially, this is why we call Valhalla a content hub, because you connect to various APIs wherever you need to. You pull it all into one place. It's kind of a hub for all your data, all your content. And then you use that data in whatever framework you choose, whether it's Gatsby, which is what I would recommend. But sometimes you want to use Next. Sometimes you want to use Astro, Remix, Svelte or whatever else you might want to use.
There's a question. There's actually a couple questions in here that kind of have to do with that. So one is, about like the framework or whatever, but also about languages. So a question that we had a little earlier was, one person said that one of the hurdles they're having is how to handle pulling content from different languages from Drupal efficiently. Like, does this help with that?
That multilingual is always tricky because every multilingual site seems like it has a different requirements. But the good thing about what powers Valhalla, it's just powered by Gatsby source plugins. And there's a source plugin called Gatsby Source Drupal that allows you to pull multilingual content, essentially allows you to define what languages you care about. It's basically matches to Drupal's lang code or, in Drupal. And then it'll provide all that content through the API. So in that case, it will pull in all that data. Now you still have to do some things on the front end to decide how you want to use that data. Sometimes you might want multilingual content on a subdomain, or maybe it's like a subpath, /en for English or es for Spanish. And then you have to decide what do you want to do when if certain pages don't have a translation. So there are still some of those things that you need to think through, and that's why every multilingual site's different. But it does provide you tools to make that possible and make it a little easier. Especially when you're going with multilingual sites and you are deciding you want to go headless, which is pretty tricky to do without something like this. And this does
Alexander in the Q&A, I think we just answered your question, so I'm going to mark it resolved. But if we didn't, please let me know. You can rephrase and put it in there. So with that, really quickly, so we've sort of seen Valhalla a little bit in action. Like, how is this different than AWS AppSync or Apollo or any of those? Like, how is Valhalla different?
So I'm not as familiar with AWS AppSync, but I'm pretty familiar with what like Apollo does, especially with like their federation and all that. Mm-hmm. The benefit here is, think of this as this is a database that's living, right? It's a cached version of all your data. So when you change something in your CMS, it syncs that data to the cache, and that cache persists. With Apollo, you're a lot of times just routing. It's just like routing queries to different APIs. So the negative there is that API always needs to be up. If you think about a lot of times with Drupal, for instance, especially if you think of Drupal in like a headless environment, you might only need 2 or 3 content editors on your Drupal site editing content at any one time. However, if you have people that are reliant on the API and you have a lot of users on your site that are reliant on that API, now you need to make sure that your Drupal site's going to scale. And Drupal can scale, but I think a lot of people probably would know that scaling Drupal is kind of expensive sometimes. You really have to make sure that it has a robust server and it can scale, and you have to have all the layers of caching right, because if things aren't cached, it can really bring down, it's a PHP web server, right? So if the cache isn't there, it can really bring things down pretty quick. Now imagine you have this cached middle layer. Your Drupal site could completely go away. It could go down. It could be, you could be doing an update. Let's say you want to do like a maintenance update or a version update. You can do an update completely separate from your data. Now your website visitors are still able to access and get all their content. And then eventually the API comes back up. You can sync the data that's changed. All is great. Now they get the newest content. Which, if you have a site, a Drupal site where there's only 2 or 3 content editors, or even 10 or 15 content editors, maybe you don't need, an API that can scale to millions of users if all you need to do is sync data to this cache. And so, and then your cached Valhalla Content Hub, right? That GraphQL API, that only has one purpose. It's just, or 2 purposes, I guess, syncing data and, passing data on to the front end. So it's a lot easier to scale that than it is to scale an entire Drupal site, which, there's a lot that goes into Drupal site, a lot of modules, a lot of PHP code that makes Drupal work, that you need to spin up anytime someone's requesting data, assuming it's not a cached, request. So
speaking of cache, I'm just gonna I'm just going to ram into that question because you said that word and there's a question about it. So how is the Valhalla cache invalidated?
So it's invalidated by this kind of sync process that I showed, right? So when I change something here, I change this and I publish.
Yeah.
Now it's going to sync here. And what that does is that is going to essentially use Gatsby's incremental builds, what we've been building for a few years, to know that this specific data has changed, and it's going to sync this data out to the API. And now the next request is going to get the newest updated data. So it's really not even when you think of like all these layers of caching that you typically think of in Drupal, it's really complex. And like if you're going to build a large scale Drupal site, you have to become kind of a caching expert. And I know there were, at the agency I worked with, there were certain people that knew a lot about Drupal's caching. I knew quite a bit, but there was others that knew more than me. And you had to become, like expert level in order to really understand all the different layers. You have a bunch of layers of caching within Drupal. You also might have like a varnish cache on top of it. So there's all different types of layers of caching. With this, is pretty simple. Like you change some content, it's now available. You don't have to worry about what's cached, what's not. It's a lot simpler of a model to think about than to have to worry about multi layers of caching.
Awesome. Okay, I derailed you a little bit, so I'll let you keep going, and then I'm going to jump back in with some questions in a bit.
Yeah. All right. So we saw it in action. There's not too many slides left, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. But kind of reviewing what Valhalla is great at and why we built it in the first place is it really makes content synchronization a breeze. This shouldn't say repository. This should really say provides a centralized data layer, because sometimes repository makes people think of like a Git repo, but it's really just a data layer. It's like a database that gives enterprises an architecture for managing content across a variety of sources. So this is, like we said, that gives you that unified GraphQL API. So whether you're building content sites, pulling data from Drupal, or e-commerce sites, pulling data from Shopify or BigCommerce, or you want to use that content in native or web applications, you can do that. The idea is you source once and then you build anywhere. So you source it once. Now that you have that content cached in Valhalla's Content Hub, and you can use that data wherever you want. You can source once and query from anywhere. So you can query it from any of these different frameworks. You pull in the content and then you use it wherever you want. And then again, you can even use it in runtime functions and SSR. So you never have to really go out to Drupal's API directly. You just let Valhalla handle the syncing of the data. You don't have to care about Drupal's JSON API or Drupal's GraphQL API or anything like that. You just turn it on, hook it up, and you could spin up a site that's used with any headless front end, and you now have a decoupled Drupal site.
So quickly, if you're using like Valhalla with Drupal, does that remove all the Drupal caching?
You don't really need to care about Drupal caching with Valhalla, because again, only your content editors are editing content in Drupal. Your front end users are never going to it. There are still some ways you can still speed up the sync process by having some caching on your using JSON API. So it doesn't necessarily completely get rid of it, but it makes it a lot less problematic, because I mean, the biggest decision you have to make is, do you want your JSON API to be basically all anonymous, which means it can all be cached, and which will speed up that initial sync. But the other important point is you don't have to sync content very often, right? It's very rare that anything other than like individual pages are changing. And so that content sync is really fast. If you ever made major changes to your content structures in Drupal and you had to do this full sync, that's where, having a little bit of caching can speed up that full sync. But for the most part, you're not doing that every day. That's something you're making some big website development change. You're changing some data structures or something, that's not how sites are typically used on a day-to-day basis. Of course it happens, but your day-to-day is content editors going in, adding content, changing content, updating content. And that's synced really fast because it's only getting the data that's changed.
Okay. I'll let you finish up, and then we're going to get through the questions.
And then, yeah, you bring your own tools. The front end frameworks you know and love are all supported. So you want to use Angular or Next or Vue or Gatsby or Remix or Svelte or whatever else is going to come out next week that I don't know the name of yet. You can use it. It's just a GraphQL API, and we're consistently working to make the tooling even easier to choose to use Valhalla with other frameworks. And then kind of this important thing, and this is really where I see it useful when I think of Drupal, is you can source from anywhere, even those legacy systems. So you can connect to your legacy GoToWebinar API without having to build, a battle-hardened Drupal module. You could build a little bit more simple, just JavaScript source plugin in Gatsby, pull in the data, and then you can just display that data on your site without ever having it to go through, needing it to go through Drupal at all.
So
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So similar to Drupal, for example, this is one of the questions in the chat, like speaking sort of more legacy type or enterprisey type stuff. Does this work with like the other kind of big three enterprise CMSs? So we talked about Drupal. Does it also work with like Sitecore? Does it work with like Adobe? Is Valhalla capable of using those?
Yep. Anything with an API can be set up to work. We have source plugins for a lot of CMSs that you just turn on, just kind of like Drupal modules, right? There are Drupal modules for a lot of different things. You just turn it on and you can use it. Source plugins are the same way. If you are connecting to an API, like in my case of needing to build that Drupal module, I had to connect to an API where there wasn't a Drupal module for that. In this case, you'd build a source plugin for if there's an API that doesn't exist. But the benefit is you can, of course, open source that. Others can maybe use it. Or if it's a custom, specific to the enterprise system, like the enterprise you're working with, then you obviously don't need to open source that, but you build the source plugin, you use it, you maintain it. And again, it's a little more lightweight than having to support, completely building a Drupal module. And with that, yeah, if you want to learn a little bit more, you can go to gatsby.dev/Valhalla. It brings you kind of the Valhalla landing page. And then, yeah, let us know how you plan on using it. And I'd be happy to answer some questions. I have some links.
I got questions for you. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to go actually like in rough order this time, because some people have been waiting for a little bit and I want to make sure we get to them first. So some I will say are like Gatsby Valhalla specific, and some are not have to do with Gatsby and are just really Valhalla specific. So this one's more of a Gatsby one. What, if any, impact does Valhalla have on Gatsby's image CDN?
No impact. Is actually the benefit is, and this is one of the really cool things, is when you are using the GraphQL API. Let me see if I can. You can actually, oops, didn't want to do that. You can actually get all of Gatsby images data. I got to remember how this works. So you can get all the Gatsby image data right here. And so when I run this, I need to specify a width or a height. Let's see if that works. I'm not setting this up correctly. Someone smarter than me would know how to do this. But anyways, you can get all the Gatsby image data right from the API, which works in a lot of ways. It means you can actually use Gatsby's image CDN with other services. You could use Gatsby's image CDN with Next or with Remix. So it actually expands what you can use Gatsby's image CDN for, rather than just using it with Gatsby. So it doesn't necessarily impact it, but it does extend its use outside of just using it with Gatsby sites.
Cool. I'm gonna just keep chugging along because we got about 10 that I want to get through. So with Valhalla, can you write back to the source APIs in this architecture?
Not currently, but it is something that
wink, wink. Okay, awesome.
It's essentially like you think of it as it's a cache. You're reading data from the front end, but there has been many use cases talked about where it could be useful to write back. So not supported today.
So more of another Gatsby Cloud sort of specific one. I thought Gatsby Cloud already had this sort of like GraphQL, built in. Is that the case? Is that not the case?
So this is where I went through kind of slides talking about how this process, there's like you have this like sourcing process, and then you have this kind of building, this generation process. So that all existed in the past, but the problem is, like, when you did a Gatsby build, you had this sourcing and you had this GraphQL API. It was only available during build time. So if, let's say you generated, you know, 100-page website, well, it sources all this data. Now it builds those 100 pages and then it deploys them, but then all that's gone. It doesn't persist beyond that one, you know, build. So the next time, you know, if you make a change, yes, it only does source that, just that data that's changed. But if I ever needed to access that data live on my website, it doesn't exist anywhere. It's only in wherever the CMS API is. So what Valhalla does is it separates out the sourcing process from the generation or the building process. So the sourcing process happens and the building process can happen after that. But this sourcing process that built this API, it still exists. So it persists beyond the fact of, like, we just built a Gatsby site and deployed it, but now we also have this API that's still available real time. I can go out and I can get the data. I can use it however I want. And in the past, you know, it would be available during the build and then it would go away. So it wasn't something you could use outside of that.
Yeah.
If you have used Gatsby develop locally, you'll know that you have like this graphical interface that you can use. Think of that, but for your production build. So it's just now that data is always available. That's what Valhalla really is it your data's available now whenever you want it, however you want it, instead of only being available during your build time.
So it's sort of, someone asked, so it's sort of like a GraphQL generator type thing?
In a way, yes. I mean, you could think of it like that. You connect a bunch of different APIs and you generate a GraphQL server that you can use. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's definitely one way to think about it for sure.
So one question that a couple people had, one in the chat, I see one in the Q&A, there's a few. I don't know why I think this is like kind of funny because I'm also really curious. How does Valhalla like know that something changed, right? Like one person said they are like, I have 100,000 nodes. Sometimes we really just need a single node to be updated, or like, you know, I just changed this one page. Like, how does Valhalla know?
Yes. So there's a Drupal module that does a couple different things. It's called the Gatsby module. And then there's the Gatsby source Drupal plugin that Valhalla uses. And they work together to do a couple different things. So on the Drupal side, you basically tell Gatsby what content types, what entity types you care about. And then if you are to change those entity types, it keeps a log of everything that's changed. So it keeps a log that this entity changed at this time. And so what happens is now when you change content in Drupal, it triggers a webhook and Valhalla says, okay, I know the last time I got content was, you know, right now it's 10:54 a.m. for me. So 10:54 a.m. So if it's 10:55 a.m. and I require a webhook is triggered, now I'll go out and get all the content that's changed in that last 1 minute. And then Gatsby or Valhalla is smart enough to know that, okay, only that content's changed, update just the database. Then if you are using Gatsby, it knows only rebuild those pages that use that content. But each front-end framework's a little different in how they handle that. But essentially that's how it knows. It keeps basically a delta log of what's changed over time, and it only syncs what's changed since the last time you pulled in data.
Awesome. Kind of pivoting a little bit. So does the Content Hub need to be turned on for Valhalla so there's no difference in writing of GraphQL queries? I'm not sure I get that.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully understand that, but if you're just using Gatsby, you don't have to use Content Hub. Gatsby works fine without it. If you want to speed up, you know, some of those builds and kind of have that cached layer, and you also want to have the real-time GraphQL API, that's where you would turn it on, and then you get this, you know, nice tab with all of this information we kind of went through today.
Okay.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, we'll see if we.
Post more information if it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. Quick question. One person said that they're looking at an app sync to convert numerous REST APIs into a single GraphQL API. They need the endpoint protected by a token of some sort, or like OAuth or whatever, because not all the data is available to the public. Is this something Valhalla can do?
Yes. So there's a couple different ways to do authentication, and we're we are eventually going to be releasing at some point kind of an all or nothing, as you said, like a token to get all the data or not. But there's also a way to write code and specify that certain parts of your graph, right? Your GraphQL database is available to certain types of people. So you can, it's pretty flexible in that you can do a lot with authentication. And then there's also, it doesn't exist today like the all or nothing approach, but that'll exist here in the near future to say, yes, we only want this token to be able to access this data. So you can customize it today, but if you want just that all or nothing, that'll come in the future pretty quickly.
Question, does the use of Drupal's paragraphs add complexities to Valhalla workflow?
Paragraphs add complexity to a lot of workflows, but it's a necessary complexity, right? Because if you want to build out pretty complex landing pages, you kind of need something like paragraphs. So what I've seen with, and this isn't necessarily Valhalla, but it's Gatsby, which again, Valhalla is kind of pulled out Gatsby's data layer from within Gatsby. It does add some complexity in that you need to understand the relationships a little bit when you're generating the data. But what you see a lot of people do, specifically with Gatsby sites, or even with any other React framework site, is they take your paragraphs and you map those to React components. And so all the data is available in the GraphQL API. There's a little bit you have to do to kind of follow the relationships down, but it's all tracked for you. You can say like, I'm starting at this, landing page level, and then I have a hero component, and then I have, some fields on there, and then you're going to feed that into our, maybe on the front end, a React component for your hero and for your landing page. So it's all possible. I don't know that it adds any, I would say, I guess it adds a little bit of complexity, but there's a little complexity that naturally happens if you're theming a Drupal site and you have paragraphs too. So I don't think it's necessarily significantly more complex, but maybe a little.
Awesome. I see one question here, which I can just answer, which is like, can you combine multiple CMS sources? Shane can answer, I can answer. The answer is yes, right? Like if you, let's say you're a university and your blog wants to use WordPress, but your main site uses Drupal. And then for some reason you have a university shop and you're using Shopify, CMS all you want. Shane, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
I didn't even need to be here for that one. You got it.
Did it? Yeah, but you can go wild with your CMSs, use whatever you want, and that works just fine. Question, there's sort of one here that someone had, which was, there's two questions actually about the same thing, which is like getting personalized content or a personalized experience. How does that work with Valhalla?
So this person's teasing our roadmap a little bit, I think, but that's kind of one of the ideas, right? Is that you have Gatsby's great, Next is great, like all these frameworks are great for creating really fast sites that a lot of times have mostly static content, but you do want to be able to maybe say this certain user should see this, and this type of user, if they should dynamically get this type of content. And out of the box, it isn't something that just works, but it is something now that if you kind of think through the possibilities, you could pretty easily build. So you could do something like we have a really large university that's using Gatsby and using Drupal, and one of the things I talk to them quite a bit about is they're more of a news. They have like a big news division, and they have quite a few content editors. But think if this was a news site, right, and I clicked on cats, well, I probably am more interested in seeing more content related to cats. So if by this action of me clicking on cats, now you could store that information and say maybe in a cookie or local storage or something, and saying, oh, this person said they're interested in cats. So in this sidebar with related articles, maybe I go out to Valhalla, get related articles that are the most recent or highly rated cat articles, and show those. So there are things you can do like that where you can pretty easily build personalized content experiences, especially if you just have like some simple things you want to add. It's really not too complex to build that now with Valhalla.
Yeah. And a random question this one had also is like, can you use Valhalla in your own infrastructure?
So no, that currently you have to use Gatsby Cloud in order to access Valhalla.
Do you think that'll change?
I don't have, that's not on the near term roadmap, but I can't say what's on the horizon. Hard to say.
Okay, awesome. We just have a few more questions, so we'll get through them quickly because I know we're right at the top of the hour and I try to be kind of timely. So I guess a couple things. One is there like a full tutorial on building a demo site with Gatsby and Valhalla?
So there are some docs, and I think if you go to the link that's here, it has links, and then there's also a docs page here that tells you quite a bit about it. So this is like a good starting spot. There are some, I think, blog posts that are coming out on how to use Valhalla with, maybe like Next.js or maybe Astro or something. I don't remember which one, but there's some blog posts that are coming out that I would recommend read through those. And then ultimately, if you are digging into Valhalla and you want to try it out and use it, I'd be happy to talk to you too, because we're actively using it on GatsbyJS.com. We're using it with a few customer sites, but we're looking for even more. We want to kind of test the limits of what it's capable of. And so if you're interested in helping us out, we'd be happy to talk to you.
So with that, we had a couple questions. Richard asked, they have like a client, they're interested sort of in a deck. Angel or Angel sort of asked, like, is there a demo? I'm interested in a POC. How should they get in contact? If people like want to dig into this more with you, if they have a client or if they're looking at this for their site, like what should they do?
Well, you can definitely reach out to me directly if you have a need. You can just my name at gatsbyjs.com, or if you go to this link here, there's a form on this page. Fill it out. Someone from our team will reach out to you. We'll kind of talk you through your use case and make sure that it actually will fit what you're looking to do. We want to make sure that it's not a lot of times new technologies claim to be a silver bullet for everything. Like, it's not a silver bullet for everything, but it is a really good solution in a lot of situations. And so that's what, we'd like to talk to you about. Let's see if the situation fits. If it does, let's get you on, try it out, see if it works for your use case. And then, hopefully you like it. And
so I have a clarification here, which is like, this person said not necessarily a demo, but a trial. If you're interested, we do have like early access and those types of things. So just contact Shane, like via, whether it be Shane at gatsbyjs.com or whether it be through sort of our website. If you go to like the product page, you can contact sales. It'll get routed to the right person. Shane or someone equally as talented will come up and talk to you. Sort of either way.
Or you can probably find me in the Gatsby channel on Drupal Slack if
That's also true. That's also true.
If you're in the Drupal Slack, if that's where you hang out, I'm also in the Gatsby channel there.
So I guess the last couple of questions, which is like, is this just like a Valhalla service, or does Gatsby is Gatsby kind of coupled with it? Does Gatsby need to take time to set up? Like, how coupled are they?
So right now it is still somewhat coupled to Gatsby, but again, you don't need to really use Gatsby to use it. So it doesn't really take that long to set up. You basically spin up a Gatsby site and connect your content, and then you never have to use the Gatsby front end. You just kind of connect a few pieces. In the future, we're going to make this even easier. So you can really think of Valhalla as a separate product from Gatsby. You might choose to use Gatsby. You might choose to use Valhalla. They work really well together, but they don't have to. You might use Valhalla with Next.js, or maybe you have a simple Gatsby site. You don't need Valhalla. Valhalla is really for, kind of more complex sites with a lot of content. So if you have a simple site, you might not need it. So they're built to be separate products that can work well together or interchangeably, or with other services. You don't necessarily have to use them together.
Okay. And then kind of like one of the last ones, like as far as sort of like pricing goes, is this included with Gatsby? Is this separate like we talked about? Like, what's the deal there?
Yeah, it's really more targeted towards enterprise customers, and it is separate. So, you might want Gatsby sites, and you're going to build a bunch of Gatsby sites that are smaller, and you don't want Valhalla. You might want just Valhalla because you want to build this Next.js app that pulls content from a bunch of different APIs, and you don't want to spin up your own, GraphQL content hub. Or you might want both. You might want, you might have a few large scale Gatsby sites that would really benefit from Valhalla. So they are separate. They're priced separately, but we'd be happy to talk to you about that if you are interested in learning a little bit more.
Awesome. So I guess if folks are interested in learning a little bit more, there are a few places you can go to the Gatsby site. If you go to the products tab, Valhalla has its own page. There's plenty of information there. There's docs, there's demos, there's videos, there's all that kind of stuff. You can reach out to Shane, as he said, at shane@gatsbyjs.com. You can go to the Gatsby website and just contact sales, and they'll just route you to the right person. That's what they do. They're like an operator that will push you out and route you to the right person. Shane, before we head out, is there anything else that you want to say? Because I know we're just past time.
No, this was fun. I appreciate all the good questions. Felt like I was, had to be on my toes a little bit,
You were in the hot seat, but you did a good job.
Yeah, it was a little bit on the hot seat, but it was good. Yeah, it was great. I'd be interested, please reach out to me. I'm happy to hear, what you think. Candid feedback's always good. Happy to show you a demo. There's a demo on that landing page too, that kind of walks through similar to what I did, but talks a little bit more big picture-y on what it could be as well. So be interested to hear from you, and hopefully get some of you to try it out.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, everybody, have a good rest of your Tuesday, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you all.
Bye.